If you grew up in a working-class British home in the 1970s or 80s, your entire universe was governed by the law of the British mum. On a damp Tuesday afternoon, her kitchen smelled of steam, carbolic soap, and a stretched stew. Mum stood by a yellow Formica countertop, running a military-grade domestic operation on a razor-thin budget. Her first commandment was simple: you never, ever threw anything away. Whenever you spotted a plastic tub of Stork margarine or Wall's ice cream in the fridge, hope hit you. But you quickly learned never to trust it. When you pried open that faded lid, you didn't find food. Inside sat tangled rubber bands, rusty brass safety pins, or spare copper coins. To Mum, a manufactured container was a luxury item. Discarding it was a sin. Hot water was a strictly managed resource, controlled by the dreaded immersion heater. Turning it on was treated with the same gravity as launching a nuclear missile. Mum considered it an absolute financial emergency if it ran a single minute too long. If you wanted a bath, it had to be negotiated hours in advance, while Mum cast a watchful eye on the electric meter. If you forgot to turn it off, the phrase, "Do you think I'm made of money?" echoed down the hallway. The bath itself was a lesson in endurance. You got a few inches of lukewarm water to share with your siblings. By the time you climbed out, the windows dripped, the linoleum floor felt like ice, and Mum was calculating the exact cost. As Sunday evening bled into the night, the house transformed into a jungle of laundry. Long before tumble dryers, Mum dragged out the wooden clothes horse, positioning it dangerously close to the coal fire. Stiff school trousers and white nylon shirts blocked your view of the television. The room filled with the smell of damp wool and hot iron steam. Everything had to be bone dry before bedtime. If your school jumper was still damp by 9 o'clock, it was hung over the oven door overnight, leaving it smelling faintly of Sunday's roast chicken the next morning. If there was one area where Mum's law was absolute, it was the strict hierarchy of the biscuit tin. On school nights, begging for a sweet treat yielded a plain digestive or a stale rich tea. These family biscuits were bought in bulk and built for survival. But hidden away at the back of the highest cupboard sat the good tin, usually featuring a picture of a royal palace. Inside lay the luxury tier, chocolate fingers, and shortbread swirls. It was strictly reserved for company. The moment an unexpected neighbor popped in, the kettle was snapped onto the stove and the good tin came down. You would sit in the corner, watching the guest carelessly eat the chocolate fingers, knowing that the second they left, the tin would be locked away in the dark. By November, the damp cold seeped straight through the brickwork. Because central heating was an unaffordable luxury to run overnight, Mum built a winter defense system, the bedding fortress. 10 minutes before bedtime, she slid a heavy rubber hot water bottle, filled with boiling kettle water, between your sheets. Then came the layers: a heavy, crinkling synthetic nylon quilt, a scratchy candlewick bedspread that felt like cardboard, and an old winter coat slapped on top. The sheer weight pinned you flat against the mattress, but trapped beneath that mountain of fabric, you felt completely invincible against the freezing winter howling outside. Waste was the ultimate enemy, and Mum's economic genius shone brightest through the predictable life cycle of the Sunday roast. It began with a joint of beef or a whole chicken, served with mountains of potatoes and gravy. On Monday, the remains returned, cold and thinly sliced with chips. By Tuesday, the meat was minced down and topped with mashed potato to become a shepherd's pie. Finally, on Wednesday, the bones and last scraps were boiled down in a massive aluminum pot to create a deep, rich broth. A single joint fed a family of 5 for 4 straight days, stretching the budget until it screamed. Long before internet shopping, high street retail arrived via a massive, brick-like book, the K's or Grattan catalogue. Mum was the gatekeeper of this paper kingdom, acting as the unofficial community banker. She collected weekly payments of 50 pence or £1 from neighbors on the street, tracking everything in a tiny, worn notebook. For millions of families, this was the only way to afford school uniforms or Christmas presents. Every Friday night, neighbors knocked on the back door to hand over loose change and settle their accounts in an economy built entirely on trust. If you needed a plastic carrier bag, you went straight to the designated bag of bags hanging on the pantry door. It was a sturdy supermarket sack stuffed with hundreds of other plastic bags, saved obsessively over years. To Mum, throwing away a carrier bag was madness. Every single one was carefully smoothed out, folded into a small triangle, and repurposed for wrapping damp football boots, lining the pedal bin, or sending leftover cake home with an auntie. Mum rarely took you to the doctor for minor ailments. Surgeries were reserved for actual emergencies. Instead, she relied on the bathroom cabinet. If you had a chest cold, a heavy layer of Vicks VapoRub was rubbed vigorously onto your chest until your skin turned red, followed by a warm flannel. The intense menthol fumes burned your eyes all night. If you scraped your knee on the concrete, she marched out with a bottle of TCP or Germaline. As the medicinal liquid stung your open wound, she looked you dead in the eye and said, "Stop crying, it means it's working." The living room was governed by heavy temporal laws. During the day, the television belonged to the children, but as 9 in the evening approached, a sudden shift occurred. Mum sat in her armchair, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically. The moment the opening titles of the 9 o'clock news blared, all talking was strictly banned. If you dared speak, Mum raised a single commanding finger or let out a sharp, frozen shh that silenced the room. For those 15 minutes, the outside world took absolute precedence. An unexpected knock at the front door after dark sparked high tactical tension. The entire living room instantly froze. Mum stopped her knitting mid-stitch. Dad lowered his newspaper, and the children stopped playing. Mum tilted her head toward the hallway, whispering, "Who on earth is that at this hour?" Instead of opening it, she crept into the hallway, peeking through the lace curtains. If it was an unwanted visitor or a salesman, she motioned wildly with her arms, ordering the children to stay silent and pretend the family was out until the person walked away. Maintaining respectability required a weekly endurance test known as the ironing board marathon. On Tuesday or Thursday nights, Mum set up the heavy metal ironing board directly in front of the television. Beside her sat a mountain of laundry. She didn't just iron shirts, she pressed the bed sheets, pillowcases, tea towels, and even denim jeans until they had a sharp, knife-like crease down the center. As Coronation Street played, she stood there for hours, her arm moving in a tireless, rhythmic arc through the warm scent of starch. Opening the cupboard beneath the kitchen sink meant facing an unstable tower of non-branded Tupperware. Because true Tupperware cost too much, Mum built her collection from empty 4-liter ice cream tubs, takeaway containers, and plastic sweet jars. The tubs were stacked inside one another in a dense pyramid, while the corresponding lids were kept in a chaotic pile at the back. Finding a matching pair took minutes of frantic trial and error, yet throwing away a tub with a missing lid remained utterly unthinkable. Before double glazing, winter brought a daily, mandatory chore, clearing the morning condensation. You woke up to find your bedroom window completely covered in a thick, dripping sheet of water, with frost forming in the corners. Before the damp could rot the frames, Mum began her rounds. Armed with an old towel or a bundle of yesterday's Daily Mirror, she wiped down the panes with fierce efficiency. You huddled beneath your blankets, listening to the rhythmic squeak of her cloth against the freezing glass. As December approached, the house entered a phase of high operational secrecy. Mum possessed a mental map, identifying every location a child would never dare venture. The top shelf of her wardrobe, hidden behind heavy winter coats, was the prime vault, along with the dark void beneath the spare bed covered by a valance sheet. If you were brave enough to hunt for your hidden toys while she was out, you did so with immense terror, knowing she counted the folds in the tissue paper and laid invisible traps. Staying warm indoors was achieved through footwear. The undisputed uniform of the house was the hand-knitted slipper, crafted by Mum using leftover balls of thick, scratchy synthetic yarn. They featured clashing colors like bright orange and muddy brown, topped with a decorative pom-pom. They had no solid sole, feeling essentially like giant socks. The second you walked through the door, Mum yelled, "Get your shoes off and put your slippers on." They had absolutely no grip, causing you to slide across the kitchen linoleum like a speed skater. Sunday night was the logistical apex of the week, where the entire family had to be scrubbed and prepped for Monday morning. Because hot water was limited, the bath routine ran like a factory assembly line. Mum was the shift supervisor, and the order of entry was fixed. The youngest went first into the clean water. As the clock ticked, the water was recycled. By the time the third sibling climbed in, the water had turned a lukewarm, cloudy grey. Mum stood over the sink, handing out rough towels that felt like sandpaper. In terrace streets, the exterior of your house was a public statement of character. Every Friday morning, Mum marched out the front door, armed with a zinc bucket of hot water, carbolic soap, and a scrubbing brush. Regardless of the freezing wind, she dropped to her knees on a rubber mat and scrubbed the concrete step. Many mums used a piece of soft limestone, known as a donkey stone, to rub over the wet concrete, leaving a pristine, creamy finish that signaled to the entire street that hard-working, respectable people lived inside. In a mid-century kitchen, fat was a valuable commodity stored permanently next to the stove in the dripping pot. Every time Mum fried bacon or cooked sausages, the liquid fat wasn't washed away. She poured the amber liquid into an old coffee mug, where it solidified into a thick, layered block of tallow. This was her secret weapon for flavor and economy, used to fry Monday's potatoes or crisp up the next Sunday roast. It smelled strongly of a dozen different meals combined, but to Mum, that jar represented pure resourcefulness. During the summer, children were cast out of the house after breakfast and expected to entertain themselves for hours. Your freedom was governed by a brilliant, celestial timer, the Streetlamp Curfew. The exact moment the orange bulbs flickered into life, an automatic psychological trigger went off. You had exactly 5 minutes to get back to your front gate. As the streets quieted, the air filled with the echoing sounds of mothers standing on doorsteps, calling out names into the dusk. If you arrived home late, the front door opened with a stern, unyielding expression. Look at the modern British home today, and you will see a world completely transformed by convenience. Central heating hums silently in the background. Hot water flows endlessly from high-pressure taps, and our kitchens are filled with single-use plastics. We shop instantly online, removing the need for a catalog agent or a weekly notebook of cash balances. We no longer stand on our front steps to scrub the concrete, and our children don't look to the street lamps to know when it's time to come home. The modern world is undoubtedly warmer and easier. But in gaining all this convenience, it's hard not to wonder if we lost something vital along the way. The homes of the 1970s and 80s were tougher, colder, and dictated by a constant struggle against a tight budget. Yet, they were also spaces of incredible resilience, shared family rhythms, and an unmistakable sense of community warmth. At the absolute center of that world stood the working-class British mum. With her overflowing bag of bags, her sacred biscuit tins, and her iron-clad household laws, she didn't just manage a home, she created a sanctuary. She turned scarcity into comfort, making sure her family felt entirely safe, warm, and protected within her walls. Which of these unwritten household laws did your mum enforce the most? Did you ever get tricked by a Stork margarine tub filled with safety pins, or get caught talking during the 9 o'clock news curfew? Let me know your favorite memories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey back into the missing moments of British history, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss our next story. Thank you for watching.